ad blocker wars, Airbnb woes, and Amazon Fire tablets that are so cheap you can't afford not to buy one. Tech News Tonight is next.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Tonight, episode 427 for Friday, September 18th, 2015. This episode of Tech News Tonight is brought to you by Wealthfront. Wealthfront is a low-cost automated investment service that's the most sophisticated way for you to invest your money. So whether you've got millions or you're just starting out, visit wealthfront.com/TN2 to sign up and get your free personalized investment portfolio. That's wealthfront.com/TN2. Welcome, I am Megan Morrone. Let's get to today's tech news. Conscience. It makes such rare appearances in this fast-moving world of tech news, especially when that conscience is directed at people who make their living from advertising. But that is what happened today when noted app developer and Mac expert Marco Arment pulled his successful ad-blocking app, Peace, from the App Store. Peace was the top paid app for 36 hours, and at $2.99, Arment stood to make a fair chunk of change off this app. But he pulled it. He said he's not going to update it, and he directed people to an article about how to get a refund if they'd already bought it. Last month, Arment made a convincing case about how mobile ads are too intrusive visually. They play fast and loose with data collection and privacy and are slowing down our access to the web. When iOS 9 was released last week, Apple finally allowed us to use ad blocking software, and Arment's app Peace was there. Because ad blockers on the web have been traditionally slightly shady operations, breaking the implicit deal we have with websites, it's no surprise that Arment's app was as popular as it was. He's a trusted name as the creator of the podcast app Overcast and the co-creator of Tumblr. But today, Arment pulled his app not because he doesn't think that the online ad world needs to evolve, but because he says he doesn't want to be in charge of deciding who is doing mobile advertising right and who is doing it wrong. This is not the end of the story. Someone else will take Arment's place, and he knows that. We'll be following this, and we would love to know what you think. Personally, I thought it was great to hear from Arment, since those of us reporting this story are often supported by advertising, so it's difficult to remain completely unbiased. I posted Arment's article on our Tech News Tonight Facebook page, so comment there or email me directly at megan@twit.tv if you would like to weigh in. Yesterday, I told you about Amazon's new $100 Fire TV that's set to challenge the upcoming new Apple TV. What I forgot to mention was Amazon's other announcement of a $50 tablet that we'd mentioned as a rumor a few weeks ago. Now that cheapo tablet is a reality. The Fire tablet is so cheap that you can use them as placemats at your dinner table, although I don't recommend it. Amazon makes no claim that the tablet will challenge the iPad, but if you've got $50 laying around, I bet you could find a good use for it. And if you have a long holiday shopping list, Amazon makes it easy for you by selling them in a 6-pack. You can buy 5 and you get the 6th one free. So far, my colleagues here at Twit have already bought 24 of them, and many of them are doing that so that they can break them open and find out what's inside. So get your $50 tablet now while supplies last. No word yet on whether there will be an Amazon Dash button to reorder the tablet whenever you need a new one. In that's not how the sharing economy is supposed to work news. This week, a San Francisco couple learned that while they were enjoying themselves at Burning Man, a trusted house sitter was watching their home, but instead of staying in it and watering the flowers as asked, that same trusted house sitter rented their house out on Airbnb without their knowledge. So I call their house sitter a trusted house sitter because according to the story in Business Insider, the couple found the house sitter on a website called trustedhousesitters.com. The house sitter probably would have gotten away with this scam, but for the fact that the couple at Burning Man knew the couple that rented their house on Airbnb from the house sitter. The renters then allegedly sent an email to the couple thanking them for renting the house to them for $2,000 for 5 days. In today's microscopic news about the potential Apple car, The Guardian reports that Apple's senior legal counsel, Mike Miletic, held an hour-long meeting with California DMV Deputy Director Bernard Soriano and Stephanie Dougherty, Chief of Strategic Planning for the California DMV. Now, these bigwigs just happen to be the co-sponsors on California's autonomous vehicle regulation project. Apple's robot car division, codenamed Project Titan, is still well in the rumor section of news as far as we know. But along with the DMV confirming talks with Apple, we also know that Apple has looked into buying a massive former military base as a possible car testing site. The Guardian also obtained documents that suggest that an Apple car prototype could be nearing readiness for public view. Apple did not comment on the Guardian's story. Coming up, 20 years of NASA VR and how do you build a scale model of the universe. But first, we should be investing, but what is the best way? You could try a traditional financial advisor, but now there's Wealthfront. Traditional advisors charge huge, sometimes hidden fees, but you can get started investing today at Wealthfront for a minimum of $500. Wealthfront is transparent and accessible. You can view all your accounts in one place, whether they're personal, joint, or retirement. You can see every trade that Wealthfront makes on your behalf in your dashboard. Sophisticated investment strategies like tax loss harvesting and direct indexing, which optimize your after-tax returns while simultaneously lowering your tax bill. With Wealthfront, you pay 0.25% a year, that's 25 basis points, 0 commissions, and no hidden fees or no additional charges for any of Wealthfront's services. Wealthfront manages over $2.6 billion in client assets, and it's grown over 20 times just in the past 2 years. So visit wealthfront.com/TN2 to sign up and get your free personalized investment portfolio. You'll see the customized allocation they recommend for your profile. And just for Twit listeners, if you sign up to invest, Wealthfront will manage your first $15,000 entirely free of charge for life. So claim your offer today at wealthfront.com/TN2. For compliance purposes, I have to tell you that Wealthfront Incorporated is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are offered through Wealthfront Brokerage Corporation, member FINRA, and SIPC. This is not a solicitation to buy or sell securities. Investing in securities involves risk, and there is a possibility of losing money. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Please visit wealthfront.com to read their full disclosure. The promise of virtual reality is an overhyped story we've been hearing about for decades. And in many cases, virtual reality is still seen as a toy for nerds, especially in the mainstream media, as we saw in a recent Time cover story. But the truth is that virtual reality is already changing science in immeasurable ways. Joining us to talk about the virtual reality experiment that NASA has been conducting to train astronauts for the last 20 years is Erin Cason, staff writer at TechRepublic. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, Megan. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. So you visited the VR lab at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. How did you get interested in what they were doing there?
Sure. Well, it was kind of a strange thing. I've been covering virtual reality for almost all of this year for TechRepublic, and I was at the Silicon Valley Virtual Reality Conference in San Jose in May and just kind of caught this really brief talk that the lab's lead engineer, Evelyn Morales, did a short write-up on it. And she tweeted at me, basically, thanks for the write-up and come see us sometime. And when you say that to a reporter, they show up, you know? So I basically kind of got in touch with them about seeing if we could tell like the whole story of the VR lab. They've been doing this for, 20 years, and it's been kind of a fascinating journey. So yeah, that's kind of how that kicked off.
Well, your story is really interesting. I mean, because, we do hear just a lot of hype, a lot of, what is this company doing? What's that company doing? Who's going to win the VR race? But this was interesting. So they use VR to train astronauts on extravehicular activity, or EVA, also known as spacewalks. I like to use the term EVA, so I sound like I'm kind of in the book, The Martian. I also call my house a hab. It's just a habit I've been coming to. How else is NASA using it besides just spacewalks?
Sure. Well, they also cover mass handling. So when, astronauts are dangling off of the robotic arm off the, side of the International Space Station, they're kind of in this position frequently where they're working with objects that are weightless but still have mass and still have a center of gravity. So they have to learn ahead of time kind of how to negotiate that. The laws of physics are the same, but just a little bit different in space. And then the other thing they do is they have this thing called safer training. And basically kind of what it amounts to is that when they're, doing a spacewalk, they're equipped with a jetpack, basically. So in the unlikely event that they would become detached from the space station, they kind of have to learn how they would fly back. Because again, like in space, it's not kind of just as easy as like, oh, hey, let me just get my little joystick out here and just fly back, So they do drills over and over and over again just to make sure they have that nailed down. So those are kind of the three main points that they work on at the lab.
So you got to wear one of the head-mounted displays and use the gloves to experience what it felt like. I know it's very difficult to describe VR to anyone. Is it possible to describe at all the experience that you had?
Sure, yeah. So it was kind of incredible. So when I was out there, they had just updated one of their headsets, and so it was at like 920 by 1080p, per eye, so it was very sharp. And basically, you start off and you're kind of floating above the truss of the International Space Station. And kind of the way it works is they fly you around. It's almost like getting picked up by the scruff of your neck, And yeah, if you look at your hands, they're in astronaut gloves. And you look down, you can see, the Earth there, and you look over your shoulder and you can kind of see the moon in the distance. And it's very striking. And even kind of up to the point where if they fly you just a little bit too close to the side of the space station, you kind of feel like you're about to, bump into it. So, yeah, it was pretty incredible, actually, because that is really the closest thing that you'll get to being there in space if you're, not actually going to be there.
So did you experience motion sickness or anything when you were using it?
No, they're at this point pretty beyond that, which is good. I also personally have thank God, a low or high threshold, I guess, for that. But yeah, buttery smooth.
So maybe you would be a great astronaut then.
Oh boy, oh man, that might just be a little bit too far from home for me.
So have you tried a lot of commercial VR headsets? I know you said you've been covering VR for a while. So how do these compare to, an Oculus or whatever we can buy now?
Yeah. So this, for example, it's funny. I was just kind of looking at the specs between what the lab has and what the kind of projections are. For example, for the Oculus consumer version that's going to come out on in Q1 of next year. And so with this one, they're just the consumer Oculus is going to just be a little bit higher in terms of it'll run at I think about 90 hertz versus this one is kind of maxes out at 60. And the resolution on the consumer version Oculus is going to be higher as well. But the thing is that since this isn't a consumer product and their customers are really the astronauts, they're operating at a higher quality, but over the years, they've been kind of able to sidestep some of the problems like having lower latency and, that sort of thing because their needs just weren't, quite the same as what you would need if you were actually going to try and put, a product on the market that you wanted everybody to use and to love and to, have this kind of incredible, flawless experience. But what they have is it's pretty slick.
So let's get back a little bit to the history of the VR program at NASA. It's fascinating. How did it get started? Sure.
So basically, at one point, there was a conference that was held in Wyoming where NASA HQ was kind of, putting the idea out there, is there anything we can do with VR? And this fellow, Dave Homan, who had been an engineer and he had done some work with, creating some graphics and some simulations for NASA, attended and was interested and started kind of, getting into this idea of is there a legitimate use for this? Is there a really concrete application, a way that we can help train astronauts, and to that point, so a lot of what they're doing, right, is the neutral buoyancy lab, the big pool, which they still do, which is, fabulous. But the thing with the pool is that it's an immense operation. It takes, 4 divers at a time. There's a lot of people involved. It's, 20 minutes to suit up, et cetera, et cetera. So basically they just kind of started along this process of figuring out, well, what would, is there a problem that we can actually solve? What they said is they didn't want to create a solution that didn't have a problem. And so for these, kind of spacewalks, in particular, the situation where the astronaut who's at the end of the robotic arm and might be upside down, for example, and having trouble communicating with a person who's operating the arm, is there a place where we can actually get them in that scenario talking and practicing and communicating? and VR just kind of happened to be that thing.
So that was 20 years ago, mid 90s, and how has it evolved since then?
Sure. So the funny thing about the story is you can kind of trace it through a history of their headsets, of their, their software, or even the types of training that they've done. But they started kind of adding, things to it. Like the mass handling robot, for example, came about a few years later on. I think 1992 is when they got started. 94 was when they introduced the safer training with the jetpacks, and the mass handling robot kind of, came after that. But a lot of it's just been a ton of iterating. They started off with a few of these head-mounted displays that they, bought from some, companies that existed back in the day, and eventually started kind of gutting them and updating, the displays and, other kind of parts of it. And then Doug, which is their big, graphics engine, is something that kind of came into being in about 2000 when they had this need to get these really intense VR graphics out of the lab and onto the International Space Station and other places in NASA, sort of internally. So yeah, it's been a lot of iterating, over the years.
So now that people are paying so much attention to VR, of course they've paid this much attention in the past, but we are again in a moment where a lot of people are paying attention to VR, and whether it's hype or not, is that helping NASA's program?
Absolutely. They're really excited about it because one thing that they were telling me in the lab, there's over the years anywhere from maybe 4 to 7 of them, and so they don't really have the time and the resource and the money to for example, invest in research on how to battle simulation sickness or, other types of problems. So to have all these people, kind of on a grassroots level, but also huge companies, spending so much time and money and effort working on, the kind of persistent problems of VR over the years is something that, they can pay attention to and they can benefit from. And they're also, looking at if there's anything that's about to, hit the market that they might be able to use. For them, they have kind of so much going on. It takes a lot of testing and a lot of care before they decide to integrate some new piece of technology, whether it be a new tracking system or a new type of, even graphics card. But their eyes are peeled.
So your time there, did you see that they were using it more to train astronauts to go on space flights, or were they using it more to replace people and have more unmanned space flights?
It's really the training is the focus, and for them it slowed a little bit after the shuttle program has ended. But they also do a lot of data products. They use the Doug graphics engine to, for example, prepare EVAs for the folks who are on the International Space Station right now, and they can kind of send them up these very detailed graphical renderings of each, individual step of what they're going to do, where they're going to put their hands, what bolt they're going to undo, and that sort of thing. And so they do a lot of those kinds of kind of database packages and whatnot. But training is still training and preparation. Mentally, physically, is still kind of the main thrust of what they do. So
it's more augmenting the astronauts, not, figuring out how we can replace them all.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So last month, the International Space Station was supposed to get a Microsoft HoloLens, but then the HoloLens exploded. It was on an unmanned SpaceX rocket. What were they going to, do you have any idea what they were going to use that for up there?
I actually don't. But, with them, they're always kind of in this mode of kind of like I mentioned, seeing, well, what is the potential that's out there? And so I know that that's something that they were interested in. So kind of what it reminds me of is they had this challenge a little while ago, several years ago, about how to get VR onto the space station. So basically what they rigged up was an upside down laptop kind of into these very simple set of goggles that the folks around the station can use to practice that jetpack safer training. And so I think that they would like at some point in the future if they could kind of get beyond a upside down laptop.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for sharing your experience at the Johnson Space Center in the VR lab. And thank you for writing about it. Erin's article is at TechRepublic. Erin is a staff writer at TechRepublic, and she's at Erin Cason on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Megan.
Take care. And finally tonight, continuing on our space theme, The Universe Today reports that filmmaker Wiley Overstreet and 4 friends traveled to the desert, in the Black Rock Desert in Nevada, to show a scale model of the planets in orbit. Of course, you've seen a scale model of the universe in terms of size, but what about distance? Let's take a look at a little bit of the video.
Not an image that adequately shows you what it actually looks like from out there. The only way to see a scale model of the solar system is to build one. Welcome to Black Rock Desert.
Okay.
And a half, so about that big around. So we are driving right now to Mercury, and we've arrived. Venus is the same size as Earth. I have the world in my pocket somewhere.
It's really an amazing video. I recommend that you guys go and watch it all. You can watch it online. You can find a link to the webpage at twit.tv/TN2. It's just amazing to see really the distance in that kind of scale. And that is it for this edition of Tech News Tonight. You can subscribe to the show at twit.tv/TN2. You can write to us at tn2@twit.tv. And of course, you can watch live every weekday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And don't miss our morning news program, Tech News Today, every weekday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm Megan Morrone. Thanks for watching.
Bandwidth for Tech News Tonight is brought to you by CashFly.com.